Well, today on the programme, we're debating a cosmic dice video that I created nearly a year ago now with the cosmic skeptic Alex O'Connor and Josh Parikh. Well, last year I released this video. It was called How a Dice Can Show That God Exists. It was a video which compared, if you like, the fine-tuning of the universe for life to rolling a dice 70 times in a row and getting a 6 every time. We'll hear the audio from that video again today. It was a surprise hit on YouTube. To date, it's had over 880,000 views, which is partially, I think, why it came to the attention of my atheist guest on the programme today, Alex O'Connor. He's an atheist YouTube vlogger. His channel is called Cosmic Skeptic. And with almost 100,000 subscribers, Alex has a large audience there. And his response video to that dice video got a lot of views as well. So today we'll hear that dice video, Making the Case for God, Alex's response video. And we've got Alex here in the studio to talk about it, plus another special guest, Josh Parikh, Christian philosophy student. He's been on the show before as well, and he's here to give his thoughts on both of those videos and to generally discuss the case for fine-tuning with Alex. Welcome along to the show, both of you guys.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you.
It's great to be here with you both, because Alex, you were introduced to me out of the blue by a few people who got in touch by email saying, have you seen that this video that you did, Justin, has had this response from the Cosmic Skeptic? So it's good to meet you in person.
Yeah, I saw the video. It's one of those things that got sent to me so many times I couldn't not make a video.
Great.
But well, it was very popular, so...
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Alex. How long have you been doing the vlogging?
Well, about a year ago, I decided to start making videos on a topic which I've always been somewhat interested in, this sort of philosophy of religion. I was raised as a Roman Catholic. I went to education that was Catholic. I was in a Catholic household. But I'm not sure sort of what happened, but it was a gradual change. I became an atheist, and my experience growing up as a Roman Catholic sort of exposed me to many of the arguments and many of the things that you'll be taught as a Christian. And so I did have a relatively good understanding of the side that I was now opposing, you could say.
So your parents are Christians, they're Catholics
Well,
themselves?
Not anymore.
Oh, okay.
My father has always been an atheist. My mum, she was religious sort of as I was young, but after she was divorced and the Catholic Church refused to recognise it, she sort of became a bit disillusioned with it.
Okay.
My grandparents are still religious, but really sort of in the household now it's pretty atheistic.
Okay. And you say only about a year ago that you began the channel. I mean, you've done extraordinarily well then in the number of subscribers you have. What's behind the response, do you think?
Well, if I knew what it was that gained me these subscribers, I'd probably do it again. As far as I know, I was shared on a blog. There's a blog called the Friendly Atheist blog, run by a guy called Hemant Mehta.
I've had him on the show a couple of times.
Oh, have you?
Yes.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and he shared one of my videos that I made a while back, responding to a pastor called Greg Locke. And from that, I got a few subscribers,
right.
and it wasn't really the surge from that, but it was I sort of capitalized upon the few people who did come and started making more videos, and then it just started growing.
And this is just something, done as with many vloggers out of your bedroom. It's sort of you just responding often to other YouTube videos and so on. And I guess you don't call yourself some kind of massive atheist sort of voice, but you've obviously gained a voice in this respect, and I'm sure learnt a lot in a year of doing it as well.
Absolutely. Every single video I've uploaded, I'm not an expert in the field. I haven't studied this sort of stuff. It's just my opinions, and every single time I've uploaded a video, I've been challenged. I've learned something new. I've been exposed to an argument I hadn't heard before. There's not once where I haven't sort of come away not understanding both sides of the argument a bit better.
And you're obviously a young man. You're, I think, still doing A-levels at the moment. This is obviously something that has, become quite interesting, though. I mean, do you feel like there's a future in this, or is it just wait and see what happens?
Well, people ask me this all the time, actually. I have only been doing it for a year, so it's difficult to say. Maybe, my luck's nearly out. Who knows? But if it keeps going the way it's going, it's certainly something I'd like to do. I don't know necessarily professionally, but
you've obviously done whatever you're doing. It's worked. I've got a friend who, again, about a year ago, started vlogging on electric vehicles. That's his main thing, and he's done pretty well. But working extremely hard, like literally almost getting a vlog out every day. He's got just over 10,000 subscribers now. It doesn't happen instantly for most people.
No,
so
it shouldn't do. But I'm not complaining.
Anyway, lovely to meet you, Alex. Thanks for coming in to the show today. And welcome back, Josh, to the programme.
Hey, good to see you.
It's great to have you back. You actually both sort of hail from the same place, because you're based in Oxford, Alex, and you're a student at Oxford University.
I am indeed.
Josh.
For my sins.
So, and just handed in your dissertation as
did,
well.
Yeah. No,
do you want to give us the very long and complicated title?
Yeah, I
of
do.
That?
I can do. So it was a 15,000-word dissertation for one of the modules of my course. So it's the moral arena, examining the explanatory resources of theism and naturalism. And so on a bit of this topic, so we're doing fine-tuning today. So looking at a bit of fine-tuning, that a lot of... So there's been a discussion of a guy called Blake Junta, who I know you've had on the show once
Quite
before.
recently, yeah.
Indeed. And that he kind of developed a kind of argument here, kind of analysing the moral arena. Saying that if kind of moral agents exist, if we kind of live in a context which is conducive to moral agents existing, then that's pretty good evidence for God existing. Interestingly, it's drawing on an argument that's made by a guy called Paul Draper, who's a philosopher. He's an agnostic philosopher, and he actually says, oh no, I think this is actually quite good evidence that God exists. And he's quite a well-known agnostic philosopher, and that a lot of
sounds like we'll need to get you back on at some point.
Happily.
Once the dissertation has been approved, I suppose, by the examiners. But
sure.
In any case, thanks for coming back on the show, because you turn your hand to lots of different arguments, Josh, the resurrection, the moral argument, the problem of evil. The fine-tuning, obviously, is something you've been interested in as well.
Right.
It'd be interesting to hear what you made of both of the videos that we're going to be hearing the audio from today. Yeah. But thanks for coming back on the show today. Well, why don't we get into this, guys? So we're talking today on the programme about a video that it's not often the thing we're debating is something that I've produced, actually. So it's a bit weird, actually, to be debating my own video here. But just to give the context, this was, I think in about June, July last year, I released a video called How a Dice Can Show That God Exists. It's essentially a take on the issue of the fine-tuning of the universe for life, and is that evidence for a creator God? Well, as I say, it did quite well on YouTube in the end. It's had over 880,000 views to date. It also did quite well on the Facebook version as well. And that was how it came to the attention of our atheist guest, Alex O'Connor, YouTube vlogger whose channel is called Cosmic Skeptic. He's an atheist. And we're going to hear his response video through the course of today's programme. It's worth saying at the outset that there are other issues that could have been raised with this video, and we've covered a few of them in programmes past. Last year we did a couple of episodes on the multiverse. Is there evidence for that? But today we're really just focusing on the issues that Alex himself brought to bear in the video. So let's hear first of all the audio from that video and the case I made and the analogy I used from rolling a dice 70 times in a row for the fine-tuning of the universe for life.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex, and I've seen many ways that people have attempted to prove God's existence. I've seen arguments from personal experience. I've seen a whole bunch of analogies. Heck, I've even seen people try to reconcile Genesis with scientific observable evidence. But here's something interesting. This guy claims that he can prove God with nothing more than the roll of a dice. Let's check it out.
Some people say that human existence is a result of a roll of the cosmic dice.
Okay, 5 seconds in and we already have an immediate straw man. It's often said of atheists that they believe that the universe and the life within it is all some kind of freak accident. But as we'll go on to see, yes, many atheists do believe that the universe has laws and principles which govern its evolution, only that these laws came about through natural processes.
Like the gambler who stakes his life savings on the next throw, we just got lucky in the lottery of life. Some people say there's no purpose in the universe, no grand plan, no God behind it all. Our numbers just came up and here we are.
I'm worried that you're getting a bit mixed up here. You said no purpose in the universe, but I think you're committing a kind of reverse fallacy of composition, which, by the way, is a fallacy that I'm going to go into when I do my Kalam cosmological argument video. But basically, I suppose think of it this way. It may be that there's no purpose of the universe, there's no purpose of the universe as a whole, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there can't be purpose existing within it. But also, it's worth considering that, to paraphrase Richard Dawkins, the universe doesn't owe you a sense of purpose. It may be the case that there is no purpose to the universe, but unfortunately that doesn't mean that there has to be a God. You see, purpose and meaning isn't a necessary constitute of the universe.
Let's pause it there and get into just the intro to the video there. So essentially a few things that you brought up there, Alex. Is this a straw man? You know, the idea that life in the universe is a freak accident, often put to atheists. So it'd be interesting to draw that out. And this idea that, but, you know, even if you can't describe an overall purpose for the universe, that doesn't mean there might not necessarily be purposes within the universe. But it doesn't owe you a purpose either, to paraphrase Richard Dawkins, as you say. Well, let's come to you first of all in response to this opening to the video here, Josh, and
Sure.
see what Alex has to say in response. What's your thoughts on this idea of purpose, and is it legitimate to say that on atheism life is in a sense an accident, a freak accident, as Alex puts it?
Sure. So why don't we kind of separate those out? So we've got the freak accident thing, and so I think that we've got to be careful when we use analogies, that kind of what are we saying the analogies are meaning. And so the idea of accident is being used in a sense to say that though this happened by chance, it's a coincidence, that kind of, it's really unlikely, but it just kind of happened, and the roll of the dice, kind of that kind of thing. And so what it's getting out, it's very unlikely. That's the idea of accident. Now, the kind of appeal that Alex made was an appeal to kind of natural processes, and the idea is that these natural processes, the way those natural processes actually are, the kind of laws we have, the special constants we have. So you mentioned later on in the video the kind of gravitational constant. We could talk about a range of others, kind of fine structure, different laws we have. But there are logically consistent universes that we can describe, which are different to our universe and don't permit life, and that we occupy a very small fraction of the universes which do permit life, and that's very surprising. And so when we talk about the kind of universe being a freak accident, I think that's actually, I think one of the kind of interesting ways that we can cash it out is say that actually what we mean by that is it's really, really unlikely that the universe kind of came out, but it's just a coincidence. I don't think that's a very compelling explanation for how the universe actually is. I think it's much more compelling that, as you argue, that there's a designer behind it all. But
I mean,
yeah.
is that? I mean, when people say, you know, on atheism, life is kind of an accident, do you have a problem with that fundamentally?
I'd say I do, in the sense I worry that there's almost somewhat of a false dichotomy being presented in this idea that it's either entirely designed, all planned from the beginning, or a complete freak accident, and everything is just completely on the roll of a dice.
Yeah.
There's so much that we don't know about the initial conditions of the universe. I mean, we can, I say we, scientists, physicists, can view the universe and track it back to its origin to microseconds after the Big Bang, but not quite to the Big Bang itself. We have no idea what happened there and before it, and it has no relevance to our physics, because it would have no effect on us today. And so we don't know so much about cosmology. There's nothing to say that there isn't some kind of necessity for the conditions that we see in the universe. And if that is the case, then
I mean, I think we'll come back to this, because you raise this issue precisely a bit later on, and I think that's a really interesting point to make. So maybe we'll leave that one till a bit later on in the conversation. What about the issue of purpose, though? Because do you take Alex's point the universe doesn't owe you a purpose? Is that a legitimate objection as far as you're concerned?
Sure, I think so. Kind of Shelley Kagan debated William Lane Craig a number of years ago, and it's one of the atheist favourite debates with William Lane Craig, actually, because they're like, oh, he lost this one. It's a fun one, and one of the points he makes is that we can talk about. Maybe the kind of theist wants to talk about big overall purposes to the universe, but we don't actually need kind of big overall purpose. We just need kind of small purposes. We can say that, oh, my kind of life is meaningful, and I have friendships, and I have intellectual endeavours.
We make our own meaning and purpose.
So kind of, almost that kind of thing, but almost kind of slightly different to that, in that kind of making our own purpose would be saying it's kind of subjective, whereas this is saying there are kind of actual purposes and they're real things, but they're just kind of not an overall kind of cosmic purpose, but just kind of small purposes. I think that with regards to the fine-tuning argument, or the kind of design argument as it's commonly made, I don't think it's a particularly compelling response, in that we actually do think there is something special about moral agents existing, that's something that's just quite surprising, that moral agents mean that we can have certain goods which come about, so whether that's certain virtues we can display, whether the existence of certain persons, certain really amazing acts of kind of heroism and bravery and these kind of things. And those are things that even a lot of atheists, and so for example I mentioned Paul Draper, and he thinks that's a kind of really surprising and kind of quite a cool observation. It's the kind of thing that God would make if God existed. As a result, that though it kind of that you can talk about there not needing to be a purpose, it just does seem that these are kind of really special things. And so if we're going to evaluate different explanations, then we want to talk about that a design explanation therefore seems to be more relevant and have a kind of greater explanatory power than kind of any other.
I mean, from your perspective, Alex, you don't believe the universe has an overall purpose, obviously, presumably.
That is correct. I would refrain from saying that I believe there is no purpose from the universe, but I would say that I don't believe that there is a purpose from the universe. It's not an active statement I'm making. Oftentimes when this is put to me, people say, well, where do you find your meaning? And I can, give the typical remark of, oh, literature, music, art, it's great, make your own purpose. But to me, again, it could even be, for instance, I was a bit surprised to see it brought up in this context, actually, because I would be perfectly willing to concede that there was some kind of prime mover, some fine-tuner, but that still wouldn't mean that there was
You
purpose
would be
to
willing
it.
to concede that?
Oh, yeah, no, I mean...
Not on the basis of this argument.
Not necessarily, but I may as well state the reason I'm here is not to try and convert anybody. I'd be incredibly excited by the prospect of being turned into a Christian today.
Well, let's see what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, I am
the show's
perfectly
out.
willing. I'm absolutely willing if evidence is put to me,
Right.
Or compelling philosophical arguments. I am absolutely open to the idea. When it comes to purpose, though, I'd say that even if you could prove to me that there was some kind of fine-tuner, that wouldn't necessarily imply a purpose behind it. Okay, it may imply a purpose behind it, but it wouldn't prove a purpose behind it. And so to me, it's a different discussion. But you don't need purpose; it's not a necessary constitute.
Do you think of a fine-tuner, if there was valid evidence for that, Josh, would imply purpose, or would be grounds for talking about purpose?
Sure. We should talk about kind of one of the words that kind of is brought up here. It's that you kind of both mentioned the word proof, and I think we need to be careful. Proof is a really kind of difficult word to use, and that sometimes proof is used in a sense of meaning certainty, and so I kind of use it in a kind of mathematical sense. So therefore I'm going to prove that root 2 is irrational, and I do that by contradiction, and that's kind of showing some sort of certainty to it. I don't think we need to use the word kind of certainty in this context. Rather, we're talking about probability. And so kind of the Bishop Joseph Butler, who's kind of an Oxford man himself as well, said that probability is the guide of life, and that we can talk about probabilities here. And I think that's kind of more interesting here. And I think that if we're going to compare hypotheses, that we're saying what's going to be the thing we talk about, are we going to say it's a designer with no purpose and doesn't really care about the universe? Well, if that's the case, why are there these moral agents? And I think that's really surprising. So
for you, it's about taking not just the evidence from fine-tuning for life, but saying, what sort of a thing has this produced? Oh, apparently something that is moral, that has a particular nature, which itself suggests something about the designer and the purposes there.
Right, yeah, and it's about, when we talk about fine-tuning, we need to talk about what are we actually fine-tuning for, because another classic objection is that, okay, iPads exist and there are very few universes where iPads exist, but why is it we don't have a fine-tuning argument for iPads? So why is it that we're talking about humans, and the idea that I would present and a lot of other people would present is it's because there are these moral agents and they're kind of quite significant beings.
Okay.
And,
Well, we'll maybe come back to some of this.
Sure.
We're already at the end of our first part, and we've got a lot more video to get through, response video. So we're going to come to probabilities, especially the actual analogy I used of the dice rolling and everything, because Alex, our atheist guest, didn't feel that really was a good analogy for what we're talking about when it comes to the fine-tuning of the universe.
Oh, I thought it was a good analogy. I just thought that you were perhaps using it in the wrong way.
In the wrong way. Okay, well, good call. But we'll come to that, and of course the actual whole point of fine-tuning is it valid as a sort of way of implying that there is a cosmic designer. So come back for the second part of today's show. We're pulling apart the How a Dice Can Show That God Exists video. Cosmic skeptic Alex O'Connor joins me talking about his response video he put up on YouTube in conversation with Christian guest Josh Parikh today. This is Unbelievable, the show that gets Christians and non-Christians talking. We'll be back in a moment's time. Before we bring in Alex and Josh to talk about that again, let's hear a bit more of the response he had to the video. Here's Alex continuing with his views on the dice video, the cosmic dice video.
But I don't believe them, and nor should you. If I roll this dice, the chances of getting a 6 is 1 in 6. That's not too bad. But what are the chances of me rolling 6 twice in a row? Well, the odds get longer. It's 1 in 6 times by 1 in 6. That's 1 in 36. So I'd have to be pretty lucky to get 2 6s in a row. Now, every time I add the chances of rolling another 6 in a row, the odds go up exponentially, and it gets even more unlikely.
I'd be careful with the way that you're wording this. I think you might be committing another fallacy, the gambler's fallacy, or the fallacy of the maturity of chances. You seem to be implying that if you rolled 4 6s in a row, then the chances of rolling another 6 on your next turn would go down. But the chances will always be 1 in 6. No matter what you've rolled before, each roll is independent, therefore the chances stay the same.
Now, what if I rolled this dice 70 times and every single time I got a 6? Okay, that's pretty unlikely, but it's possible, right? Well, in fact, the chances of rolling a 6 70 times in a row are around 1 in 10 to the 55. That's a 1 with 55 zeros after it. Now, just to put that in perspective, how long would I have to stand here rolling this dice, allowing about 5 seconds per roll, before hitting that lucky streak and rolling 76s in a row? Well, I had a mathematician friend work it out for me. On average, you would have to continually roll this dice for 100 trillion, 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 trillion years before your numbers come up. That's a long time.
Now, this is an accurate probability, but to anybody who thinks that this contradicts what I just said, the only reason that this probability can be applied to the entire sequence of rolling 70 dice is because we'd already decided that we wanted to roll 76s in a row. After having rolled 76s in a row, the chances of rolling another 6 would still be 1 in 6.
What if you applied that thinking to us? What are the odds of us being here? Now, the odds of rolling 76s in a row, 1 in 10 to the 55, as it happens, those are the same odds of something called the expansion rate of the universe being just right for the existence of us here today.
I'm afraid that's not quite right. You're using the right number, but you're not using it in the right way. There wasn't necessarily a 1 in 10 to the 55 chance that the expansion rate of the universe would have been what it was. Rather, you should think of it as if the expansion rate of the universe had been different by a factor of 1 in 10 to the 55, then the universe as we know it couldn't exist. Now, it might seem like this is just trivial and I'm just being pedantic, but it's an important difference, and the reason is that the case that you're presenting in the form that you're presenting it implies that there was an equal chance of different expansion rates occurring. You're saying that a slow expansion rate had the same chance as a fast expansion rate had the same chance as the expansion rate which we actually see today. But by presenting the facts correctly and simply stating that if the universe's expansion rate had been different by a factor of 1 in 10 to the 55, then the universe couldn't exist, you're not implying that different expansion rates had the same probability. It may be that the universe had to have the expansion rate that it has today. But even the fact that the universe is expanding at all is a bit of a mystery. Of course, we know it must have gotten started at the Big Bang, but the expansion rate of the universe is actually accelerating, and nobody knows why. A lot of scientists have put it down to this mysterious energy that they call dark energy, but nobody really knows what that is either. And so there's so much mystery surrounding the expansion of the universe. To make a claim that you know that the probability would have been the same for different rates of the expansion rate of the universe is nonsense. I mean, who knows? Perhaps dark energy is some kind of regulator which governs the speed of the universe's expansion. Perhaps due to some undiscovered law, the universe has to be expanding at the rate which is expanding. I don't know. But you don't know either.
There we go. It's always fun, isn't it, when you in retrospect didn't know you'd be sitting opposite the person who you'd be describing as nonsense. No, but it's fine. It's that's the nature of YouTube. It's opinionated. People like that. But I'm glad that we can come in and have the discussion about it, because there's a couple of really interesting objections you have there. The first one is kind of a sort of technical objection about the cumulative probability of rolling dice versus the fact that every time you roll a dice, it's always going to be 1 in 6, no matter what's come before, and that kind of thing. But this other one, which again we'll need to kind of get our heads around a bit, but there's a difference in your view between me saying these are the odds of rolling 76s in a row is different to saying the tolerance level, if you like, for the expansion rate of the universe is 1 in 10 to the 55. So let's come to you first on that, Josh. First of all, this first issue, is it an issue that there is obviously a difference between the cumulative number of rolls you make? If you get 76s in a row, that's 1 in 10 to the 55, but every single roll is 1 in 6. It doesn't stop the fact that the next roll is just as likely to be 1 in 6s.
Yeah, I'd say it's completely irrelevant.
No, you don't think it's irrelevant? You don't think it's relevant?
I don't think it's relevant. I'd say that because when we talk about... so when you're using this as an analogy to the kind of fine-tuning of the universe as a whole, and that it is true that kind of the gambler's fallacy is just a thing that's true, but that's not what's being talked about here. Is that the analogy that's being made is between the 70 rolls of the dice and the expansion rate of the universe. And again, we don't have to talk about the expansion rate. We could talk about the cosmological constant, which is kind of between 1 in 10 to the 53 and 1 in 10 to the 120, or all these other laws. And so it's not just that law in particular. And so those are the analogies that are being made. It's between those particular fine-tunings and the probability that's assigned to kind of set 70 rolls of the dice. And so
I mean, you because we might not get time to play it later, you also mention later on in a related way, Alex, that any number of 70 rolls is equally unlikely. So any kind of combination of 70 rolls is 1 in 10 to the 55.
This is where it becomes relevant. I completely agree that on its own that point is entirely irrelevant and it's just being pedantic, such is the nature of YouTube. However, the reason that I decided to leave it in the video was because later I do make this point, and it's important to realise that of course we ascribe meaning to rolling. I like to simplify it because it's a huge number. Let's say 4 6s in a row, like I do in the video. That is a pretty extraordinary occurrence. However, if you were to predict the numbers 2, 3, 6, 1, and then roll that would be just as would be precisely
unlikely,
the same.
Yeah.
So you're correct in the sense that if you said you wanted to roll 4 6s, and then you roll a 6, then it's 1 in 6. But the chances then do become cumulative. That way you can then say the chances is smaller and smaller.
The thing is that in the comments section underneath my video, a lot of people made the same point. They said, but hang on, any number of combination of dice rolls over 70 is equally unlikely. Therefore, what's the big deal? What is the big deal?
So let's use an analogy because everyone loves an analogy. So suppose we're playing poker together and I'm kind of dealing for everyone and we're playing for quite a lot of money, and that I kind of deal you and you guys get rubbish hands, and then I deal myself and I get a royal flush and I win all the pot and we're like bet quite a lot of money. Then we deal again and I get another royal flush, and in fact I get 10 royal flushes in a row. And you guys are quite upset about this because I'm taking all your money. But I say at the end of it that you see the kind of any number of any hand that I got would be equally likely here.
So what are you complaining about?
What are you complaining about, guys? Just stop complaining. So let me explain why is that relevant. And the reason it's relevant is because we've got a specialised outcome which is special. And you're right that that any other outcome, if specified beforehand, would be special. But that's the point, is that these outcomes have been specified beforehand. So just as a kind of bank card, if I kind of took your bank card, you have a kind of random four-digit number, and that's kind of quite random, but it's specified because that's the number you remember. And so similarly in this universe, we've got quite a specified outcome, and the specified outcome is that life exists. And that life exists and moral agents exist, kind of the point I've made, and that I would argue that that's a kind of meaning we've discovered. It's a kind of something that morality is something we discover rather than something created. And it's not something we presuppose in some sense, but is rather something we
so the reason,
discover.
If you like, the 76s are the roles that needed to happen for life to exist, let's say.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Rather than for a sterile universe to exist, which couldn't support life,
Sure.
which could have existed on any other number of roles. And I guess that was the point of the 6s in a row. So I don't see where the force of the objection comes from myself, Alex, in terms of of course, yes, we are talking about this specific combination of values in terms of the fine-tuning allows life to exist. That's why it appears special.
Yeah, a wonderful analogy you bring up. I hate to have to say it. I believe it may work in my favour. You see, the reason that a royal flush... okay, so we decide that a royal flush is special, that it has worth before we begin playing the game.
Right.
And that way you could say beforehand, if this were to happen, if you were to present 4 royal flushes in a row, I believe you to be cheating. And then you go and do so, I would accuse you of cheating. But likewise, again, if I were to say that, if you had 4 hands in a row and I just named some random hands that had no value and you pulled those as well, I could also have reason to assume that you were cheating. The only reason that the royal flushes are more significant is because that is significant to us. I would say that what we're doing here, like you said, I can't remember the phrasing you used, but you said that one of the sort of conditions that we sort of are working with is life existing. But of course, we only value life existing because we are life. What you're assuming is that life was the purpose before the universe began, and you're also assuming that if the universe was different, that life could not exist. But the problem is life is so poorly defined. We only have one example of life, and we have many varieties, but every single animal and living thing on this planet stems from
it's
one.
inappropriate for us to kind of say this is special because, well, we wouldn't think it was special if another roll of the dice, as it were,
Well,
had
special
come
is
up.
subjective, but yes, I suppose that's the grid of what I'm saying. I'd say, for instance, with the analogy of poker, isn't it astonishing that playing cards are so finely tuned to the game of poker? If there were more or less suits, or if there were less than 13 of each suit, the game of poker couldn't be played. How extraordinary is that? Well, it's not extraordinary at all when you realise that the game of poker was built and evolved around the cards rather than the other way around. And in fact, if the cards had have been different, if there were 5 suits instead of 4, the game of poker probably still would have evolved, but just differently.
Have a slightly different game of poker. Okay, response on that one, Josh?
Sure. So a lot of different points were made there, and so I'll try to hit those that I remember. So we've got the idea that this is kind of being, so that the specialness is subjective. I dispute that this specialness is subjective. I think it's an objective, that meaning or morality, I would argue, is an objective thing. Moral realism is something that I'd kind of argue for, and so one argument for moral realism, and that moral agents, and therefore I have this particular belief that moral agents are a special thing, and I've kind of presented some of the reasons for that. One of the reasons is kind of the argument from phenomenal conservatism, which is the idea that it's a principle by a guy called Michael Humer, and he talks about that if something seems to me to be the case, then without a reason against that, then I'm okay to accept that. And that the reason that's okay is that everything I believe is based on seemings, and that if I kind of perceive it, kind of seems to me to be the case that actually, that if I want to say that this kind of principle is wrong, then it seems to me to be the case that this principle is wrong, but hang on, I'm relying on a seeming to do that. So I always have to rely on seemings, and as a result, I can't get away from seemings. And so similarly, it seems to me that morality is a thing. It seems to me that moral agents exist. It seems to me that pain is bad, that love is good, and all these kind of things. And so as a result, I'm okay to accept that as an objective fact. And so it seems to me that these are the case. And as a result, I would say that this specialness is an objective fact rather than something else entirely.
Okay. Look, I mean, let's come to the second issue, which is whether it is an appropriate analogy to draw in the first place with the fine-tuning itself. Because the point was that the expansion rate of the universe, if it differed from its actual value by 1 part in 10 to the 55, then it would either have expanded too fast for us to be able to get the chemicals together that would eventually produce life, or it would have collapsed back in on itself and so on. So if we're accepting that is the case, right, your objection then, I think, Alex, was, but that's not the same thing as saying, what are the chances of rolling 1 in 10 to the 55?
What you're describing is a margin of leniency.
Yeah, because you're saying we don't know whether the values could have taken a different. Maybe there isn't much wiggle room.
The
in
knobs
these values.
may not be for turning.
And so in a sense, it's not quite the same thing. I mean, where do you come down on that, Josh? Is this a problem for the analogy at the centre of this video?
Sure. So we've got a couple of different things here. One is what's the kind of the use of the term kind of probability as a whole. And so we've got to should probably then say, well, what is probability when we're defining this concept? We use this concept the whole time. So what is it actually? So kind of a very layman's version of probability is what is favourable over what is possible, or what is likely over what is possible. And so we look at the possibilities of all the different universes we can describe using theoretical physics. There are a very small proportion of those, according to kind of the discoveries in theoretical physics, which would permit life. Therefore, it's likely over what is possible. So it's very unlikely that life would be permitted in our universe over what is possible. Now we kind of get to this kind of further point, maybe there's just some sort of deeper necessity in the universe, and that's the reason that life exists. And so there's kind of some sort of unseen law which explains
which sets these values at the very precise level they have, in a way that we don't know yet, in some way.
So I could say a couple of things about that. One is that law probably requires fine-tuning itself, if there was such a law. And so when we look at a lot of the postulated deeper laws, something like inflation, which you kind of discussed on the show last year, that seems to require fine-tuning itself. So whether that's the kind of famous fine-tuning problem of inflation, which kind of Neil Turok describes, which is fine-tuned as 1 pi in 10 to the power of 13, whether that's kind of so Max Tegmark has 6 kind of things that any inflationary theory would have to fulfill to be a kind of good inflationary theory. And so that in this deeper law may require fine-tuning itself. The second thing I'd want to say is that any deeper law, it's ad hoc to say that deeper law is going to be in favour of fine-tuning. In fact, it may be the case that deeper law points away from fine-tuning. Now, because we don't have access to this deeper law, we have no knowledge about what this deeper law is like. So it could be the case that the deeper law actually makes the whole situation worse. And so this deeper law is kind of make another kind of level of fine-tuning, which is much, much, much worse.
I mean,
so
the other thing that struck me when I heard that objection, Alex, is if there were some kind of, I don't know, theory of everything, some deeper law that explained why the values had to take the value they have, isn't it still just a fundamentally amazing thing that it happened to be the values that would produce life?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it doesn't stop it being pretty amazing.
But much in the same way that once Charles Darwin proposed natural selection in 1859, biology became no less amazing. In fact, I think that a worldview based on science is endlessly more awe-inspiring, to me at least, than one based on any theology. But I think we're both here arguing the same thing, almost, that there is some kind of unseen law that governs the fine-tuning of the universe. I argue that it may be some kind of undiscovered law of physics that's intrinsic to the universe. You argue that it's a god. The difference being that neither of us has proof. And it seems that you are the ones making the active claim, saying you believe there is intelligence behind it, and I'm the one saying I don't know. You know, it may be that there's intelligence behind it, but I'm yet to see the case for it. I'm pretty convinced that there is something governing the expansion rate, to take one thing, of the universe. But to then say that
is it still just a fluke, though? That it happened to produce us.
Well, this is my problem with this. A lot of this is the sort of anthropocentrism of it all, assuming that we are the purpose. I mean, are we really expected to believe that some intelligent being decided to create a planet on which there were humans? And instead of just doing so, he decided to create an entire circus of cosmology, beginning with unnecessary expansions, billions of stars being born and died, and planets being engulfed by their stars and flying off into the emptiness of space. And all this before the atoms which constitute the ground which we now stand on had even been formed in the centre of stars, only to then go on to create a planet along with 7 other planets which have absolutely... which are desolate of any meaning to God's chosen great ape, upon which, you know, this planet where an environment would grow, which would be well but not perfectly suited to the evolution of billions of species, 99.9% of which are brutally retired from existence, just to allow for the evolution of one particular breed of humans, Homo sapiens, who would live and die pillaging and stealing and killing each other until God, if you're a Christian, finally decides, okay, let me reveal my word through some ambiguous scripture that makes absolutely no reference to this entire circus. And to me, that seems a little far-fetched. I would say that if this universe was designed for something, it takes a pretty extraordinary leap of faith to believe that something is us.
Okay. Josh?
Sure. So a couple of points. One is that there was a quick dichotomy made between a worldview made on science and a worldview based on theology. I would just dispute that that's a good dichotomy for the kind of 2 worldviews we've got here. I say we've got one view which is based on a variety of different kinds of reasoning, whether it's science, whether it's kind of perception, whether it's moral reasoning, whether it's any other kind of reasoning. And that's the same thing that Christianity is trying to be based on. It's based on a variety of different types of reasoning. So I don't think that's a good dichotomy. The second thing, there was talk about So Justin Sheba, who's a friend of mine, has talked about the hostility of the universe to life. So basically, some of the stuff that you've described, that there's all these other planets, all these this other stuff which is completely irrelevant to life, where life couldn't exist, and yet we've got kind of this universe where we've got this planet where it's after billions of years, life suddenly develops. The remark you made there, I think, is helpful, because you said that did God do this just for life? And the answer is no. God has other things. It's no part of the fine-tuning argument that the only thing that God wants is moral agents. That's one good. Like, sure, God wants to do that, but God might want to do other things. And in fact, I think that there are lots of goods that this allows for humans alone. So one, we can see amazing theoretical physics, the kind of wonder we talked about already, that I think science is absolutely amazing, that we get to see the kind of way the universe works. That inspires a kind of sense of awe in us, kind of the beauty of the universe as we actually have it. And there are also kind of particular things. So Luke Barnes, in his book A Fortunate Universe, talks about particular reasons that actually this might be helpful for fine-tuning, and so the way in which the mass of the universe works. So you can look at his chapter of his book A Fortunate Universe, and he talks a bit about this there. So it might have fine-tuning consequences as well. And so that would be what I'd say about that. There's kind of a couple of other points there. But I think that's
is
a
your
helpful
fundamental
overview.
point, I suppose, Alex, that you would expect God to do it differently if there really was a God? It seems like there's too much waste.
I agree
going
that the dichotomy I presented was wrong. I perhaps should have said naturalism rather than science, because of course, if you could prove God, then God becomes encompassed by science. What I was going to say about, what was it you just said, the point?
Well, the wastefulness as you see it, and you think that if God were behind it, it would seem to be a bit more. I don't know. It would have happened more quickly. There wouldn't be such a large universe that we're part of.
Sean Carroll, a cosmologist, again in a debate with William Lane Craig, who I've seen a lot of his work. He brings up this idea that. Wait, I've forgotten the point again.
it was something kind of.
All right. The point being, is this a lot of wastefulness? You wouldn't expect God to create humans in this
science.
way.
It was about science. The idea being that if this were honest science, what you would do is you would propose the hypothesis. You would say, okay, we believe that there is a God behind the universe. What would we expect to see if this were the case? And then you would analyse the universe and see if it fits up to the hypothesis. But it seems like the opposite is happening, because if we were to hypothesize a God, and we could say that if that were the case, what would we expect to see? The universe probably wouldn't be so hostile. It probably wouldn't be so expansive if we're assuming that humans are.
Well, let me toss it back
purpose.
to Josh at this point then. So, because you, Josh, do believe that the universe obviously exhibits evidence that is best explained by God.
Sure. So I think that this is a really interesting point. So Sean Carroll, who I actually met last year, whatever. I met Sean Carroll earlier this year, and so he, in his book, kind of in his debate with William Lane Craig, also in his book, The Big Picture, so he talks about theism being a really poorly defined hypothesis, and you can make anything fit with theism at all. I kind of want to just play, partly I just want to play a two-quote, say that doesn't really only fit theism. I think naturalism is pretty poorly defined. Why is it that naturalism favours kind of physical objects rather than non-physical objects? Why is it? Does naturalism predict moral realism? Does it predict non-moral realism? Does it predict the existence of consciousness? Does it not? There is just so much in naturalism that I think is poorly defined. And so I think part of the reason that Sean Carroll is mistaken here is that he's using scientific terms. When we're not doing science here, we're doing philosophy, that we are, therefore, it is just slightly more ambiguous, and the way we which hypotheses are proposed is just slightly more ambiguous. And so I think that we can still make predictions, and I have made certain predictions in this, that God would create a moral arena, and that those moral agents would exist. I don't think that's the only thing God would do, and I've proposed a number of other goods as a result that would make sense that for God to create, and the reason, and so that would be what I'd say in response to that. I don't think theism is the worst defined hypothesis, and I'd also say that naturalism isn't that great either.
I agree.
I mean, one of the issues you bring to bear, I won't play the video, but it would be good to maybe discuss it in the next final section of the programme, is that whole thing of, well, if we weren't here to observe it, then obviously we wouldn't It's unremarkable that we live in a universe fine-tuned for us because we are here to observe it. We'll come to that in the next section because we should go to a quick break and then open up this next element of the discussion. We're going to sort of just move on a little bit in the conversation to what's a common objection I find to the issue of fine-tuning for life. And let's hear how Alex put it in this section of his response video to my video.
From the moment of the Big Bang, when our universe began to rapidly expand, the rate of that expansion was exquisitely finely balanced. Any faster, and the universe would have expanded too rapidly to allow the formation of chemicals, atoms, stars, and galaxies. Any slower, and the universe would have collapsed back in on itself. But as it happens, the universe expanded at just the right rate to allow for life to develop in the future, for us to be here.
I think you've hit on quite an important point here. It is astonishing that the properties of the universe are so finely tuned to allow for life to then go and observe how finely tuned that universe is. But of course, if the universe was tuned in any other way, then that life wouldn't have been able to evolve to then observe the universe. And so, of course, the properties of the universe had to be as they are to allow for life to go on to observe that the properties of the universe are as they are. But also, as stated before, your dice analogy is grounded in faulty logic. Your number describes a margin of leniency, not a probability.
So we'll pick that up again there. And the fundamental issue that you raised there is this, I think it's sometimes called the weak anthropic principle, this idea that, of course we live in a fine-tuned universe for us because we're here to observe it. If it was anything else, we wouldn't be here to. So it's not particularly remarkable. Do you have a problem with that? I know, Josh.
Yeah,
that
so I
objection.
think, again, let's use an analogy that I love analogies. So that suppose we're kind of in a room and that I sent a kind of video through to Alex before we came here and said this analogy from there or a podcast. And so suppose we're in this room and Justin tells me that, Josh, I'm actually Magneto, and that I'm one of the X-Men, and I say, you're one of the X-Men, he's like, yeah, I am, and so then he kind of, if he proves it, he kind of lifts up the remote control in the room and kind of waves it around, and like, that's great, but that's a magic trick. So what he then does is he gets all the kind of equipment in the room, all the metal equipment, and smashes it into the wall behind me, and it forms a silhouette around me, and it's kind of an amazing silhouette, and the kind of rest of the wall is completely destroyed. And then...
But you're left untouched.
I'm left untouched, and it's completely amazing, and I get to the end of that and say, but see, if I had died, then I wouldn't be able to observe this. And so, of course, I'm still alive. Now, what's the problem with that? And suppose we kind of did this over and over and again and with similar stuff. What's the problem with this reasoning? Because that seems like bad reasoning. And the reason is we're making a scope error. We are analysing two different statements. One statement is it's not surprising that we don't observe that we don't exist. That's true. That's completely true. It is surprising still that we do observe that we do exist because of the fine-tuning or because in the analogy that I kind of got missed by a fraction by all the equipment in the room or kind of by a firing squad that was trained,
I mean, yeah, the commonly the analogy that's given is the firing squad.
Yeah, right.
Which a crack firing squad takes aim at the prisoner, all fire at the same time.
Yeah.
The prisoner walks away unscathed. Someone says to him, "Isn't it remarkable that they all managed to miss you?"
Yeah,
and he says,
right.
"Not at all, because I wouldn't be here to see that if they hadn't." Well, that just seems wrong. That doesn't seem like the right reasoning. Of course, it's something odd's gone on there. The fact that you survived is the kind of the thing that needs explaining. And in my view, I've never thought this is a good objection. I must admit, Alex, because I feel like it's a hand waving to say no. The fact we're here obviously means that nothing to it really. Well, it's the very fact we are here that needs explaining.
That's what we're arguing.
Do you still stand by that objection?
I wouldn't have necessarily said I stood by it in the first place on its own. I agree with you. It's an awful argument to put forward by itself. It's awful. What I would say is, in conjunction with other arguments, it helps to sort of help people to visualize what I'm saying, which is why I put it in the video. For instance, if you were to assume or to entertain one of the other explanations, such as a multiverse or some kind of laws which could have changed the universe, but not such that the universe wouldn't exist, rather that life would just have evolved differently, it would, in that sense, to say that we see the universe as it is now, as we see it, because it had to be that way. I wasn't necessarily saying in the sense of, we are alive but just in the sense that we see things as they are, and that if we had have evolved differently, we would have seen them differently.
I mean, again, though, this was a common comment in the comments underneath my video, and again, I have a problem with it. The idea that, oh, but life just adapts to whatever it finds, and so something else would have evolved if there had been a different set of fundamental constants and quantities. But my point is, you wouldn't have had chemistry to get anything going in the first place without the fine-tuning.
I don't find it to be particularly compelling for that reason, for the sake that, yes, if you were assuming an infinite amount of ways in which the universe could have been tuned, there are many, many, many ways within that, infinite, in fact, which would be life-permitting, but more. A larger infinity that are not, which is why I don't find it to be compelling. But again, if you are assuming infinities, then of course there's an infinite chance and inevitability that life would have evolved.
But that would be if there's a multiverse thing,
or not necessarily.
We won't go there today.
Not necessarily, because it's not just an idea of a multiverse. Just briefly, it's not necessarily individual universes, but perhaps one large fabric in which there are sort of localized areas.
It's
perhaps
multiverse by a different name, I guess.
On a timeline, maybe expansion, collapse.
Right,
who knows?
Sure.
But again, the point is we don't know, and so to claim it's a god seems to be a bit of a leap of faith.
Well, let's talk about the god's side of this. I mean, for you, obviously, Josh, you feel that God is a good hypothesis to put, at this point. I mean, one of the things, and I won't play the video out for the sake of time, but one of the issues that Alex brings up at the end is, if it were true that this provided evidence for some kind of God, it would only provide evidence for some kind of first mover. We've no way of knowing if this was kind of the intention, that we are somehow the intention of this first mover. It doesn't provide evidence for the Christian God specifically. I mean, what's your response to that?
Sure. So there's a problem in philosophy of science if how you restrict the kind of types of, I've talked about the word kind of hypothesis, just kind of what you're, how you restrict that to kind of particular things. So why do we use a kind of designer? Why do we call it the kind of Christian God? Why is it not a kind of different range of things? The reason that we can talk about a Christian God. I might even kind of be prepared to concede that we might not get to kind of Christian God in full from this argument alone, but I'd make a cumulative case, and we could talk about the resurrection, or we could talk about the arguments from prophecy, or the character of Jesus, or there are just loads on that. But we can talk about God because I think that God is, Robin Collins calls it that a hypothesis is not ad hoc if it's independently motivated or widely advocated before, and that God is certainly widely advocated before as an entity. We don't advocate kind of deeper laws before. That's the whole point, is that these deep laws weren't advocated before, so they seem kind of ad hoc to restrict it in the way we have. But God has been advocated before, and there are independent arguments even for God's existence, and so whether that's
so you see the fine-tuning then as you say, part of a cumulative case for God, and specifically the Christian God, because I've often taken it that way. I didn't in the video claim that this showed that the Christian God existed. I would say though that it shows, for me, it's evidence that there is some kind of an intelligence behind the universe, and I would, like you say, Josh, put other arguments into play for why the Christian God is the God that we're talking about here, because of the argument for the resurrection and things like that.
Well, I would agree that you don't have any, that's not a burden you bear. You don't have to prove that it's the Christian God. This can still be a compelling argument without that.
And I suppose at the very least, if it is true, it rebuts naturalism, let's say.
Sure. Yeah, well, I'd say so.
Even if it doesn't prove a particular God.
What I would say is, when I talk about this idea of it not proving God, capital G-O-D, that would also apply to small g God, in my opinion. You know, you could prove to me that there was some kind of force, some kind of unseen mover, but why on earth does it need to be conscious? Why on earth does it need to care specifically about humans? Why on earth does it need to have any of the attributes that if you did not give a being, it would not be God?
The deist kind of,
exactly,
remote,
it could be.
Uninterested kind of force type God.
But even so, that is something which I think is the crux of the argument here. We're not arguing for a sort of Christian God. We're arguing for a deist God.
Yeah, we're a few steps back in the argument.
Once you won me over on that, you can try me with the Christian theology.
I don't know. Maybe we should just go straight to the Christian theology. But in any case, It's been very interesting having you both in the studio to talk about this. I mean, any final thoughts that you'd like to bring in before we sort of wrap things up, Josh?
Sure. I think that I'd want to say that we've covered a load of material, and that I would want to say to anyone listening to the show that I'm sure that kind of some of Alex's subscribers that I'd kind of want to emphasise that these are really difficult questions, really important questions that require lots of reasoning and really thinking about, and we're not always right when we come to it immediately. And so I would just want to press on you that you might listen today and you might be under the impression that this may be true. And in fact, I think you should be under the impression that this may be true. And if that's the case, then Joseph Butler suggested that a serious rational apprehension of the idea that Christianity may be true puts us under a duty of inquiry. So I would just want to suggest that people really look into this argument in particular. I could recommend the kind of shows that Justin did last year, in particular the Luke Barnes show and his material, Luke Barnes' book, A Fortunate Universe. On particular other arguments, I would suggest William Paley's book, not the Natural Theology, which kind of you might be more familiar with, but a kind of different book of his, which is called A View of the Evidences of Christianity. And he lays out a number of arguments for Christian theism, so from the resurrection, from prophecy, from the character of Jesus. He also responds to some really kind of common objections which are common to that today, and so things like contradictions in the Bible or things like that. That's free online, and that's very easy for you to find. I would recommend that. And I just want to emphasize, because this question is really, really important, that if kind of this is a question of eternal life, a question of salvation, all this kind of thing, that means it's a really, really, really important question. So we want to come to this question and really pursue it, and not be lazy in that kind of pursuit, but to really pursue the arguments fully. So that's what I'd want to say here.
Any final thoughts from yourself, Alex?
I would like to perhaps briefly address the atheist audience, which may or may not be listening here. I don't know what your demographic usually is.
We have a lot of atheists who listen to Unbelievable.
Well, fantastic. I would say to you as a fellow atheist, don't be so arrogant as to assume that if there is that if you're unconvinced by this argument that there definitely is no God, you must be open to the idea to go into an argument and to sort of pre-assume something, and to go in wanting to defend a position rather than wanting to have your position changed is the wrong way to go about things.
Well, hats off to you, especially Alex, because it's one thing to stand in front of a video camera and give your opinion on something. It's another to come in the sort of cut and thrust of a discussion. But you've done a brilliant job, and thank you for being willing to do that.
No problem. It's been great fun.
And I hope that you come back again at some point in the future, if time allows. But
absolutely.
For the moment, thank you both, Josh and Alex, for being on the programme today. Links, of course, to Alex's website, well, where he is on YouTube, at least, as the Cosmic Skeptic from today's programme. Just search Cosmic Skeptic with a K on YouTube to find him. I'll make sure there are some links to Josh's stuff as well from today's show as well.
Sure.
All of that available and more from premierchristianradio.com/unbelievable. Be interested to hear your thoughts about today's show as well. I'll be giving you the ways to get in touch as usual in a moment's time. But for the moment, thanks, guys, for being with me.
Thank you so much again.
All done. Thanks, guys.
Fantastic.
Lovely.
It's good fun.
Great.